after 4 years as president, you know me by now. You know me. You may not agree with every decision that I've made. You may be frustrated at the pace of change. I always remind people that when we did the auto bailout, only 10% of the country approved of it, including, by the way, folks in Michigan and Ohio. But you know what I believe. You know where I stand. You know I'm willing to make tough decisions, even when they're not politically convenient.
They came up with something this last week, though. The president said he's going to consider putting in place a Secretary of Business, all right, a Department of Business. Well, first, of course, we already have a Department of Commerce, and commerce and business do mean the same thing, after all. But I don't happen to think that putting in a new chair in the cabinet room is going to bring new jobs to the people of America. So we got a plan instead to do that.
Welcome back to Morning Joe. Joining us now from Washington, the moderator of Meet the Press, David Gregory, and NBC News chief White House correspondent and political director and the host of the Daily Rundown, Chuck Todd. Gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, David, let's start with you. We have, as I said to Gene, been consumed by the storm over the last week or so, but we are less than 96 hours away from polls opening across the country on Election Day. Kind of reset this race for us. Where are we right now?
Well, we're still in a very tight race, a very close race as we go into Election Day, with both sides making the case that they have an advantage. There's no question that the president's campaign thinks that some of the optics of Sandy, and I don't mean that in a crass political way, but a sense of this being a big government moment, the president's growing relationship with Chris Christie, all of those things gave him the edge of incumbency that he takes into the final days of this race, in addition to his ability to compete and even those battlegrounds that could slip away to Mitt Romney. But with the focus on Ohio, the Midwest firewall, that seems to be an advantage right now for the president. But look, the Romney team still believes they're very much in this. This is still a very close race. And I think by all accounts, that's where we are going into Election Day. I will say this, and Chuck and I were just talking about it. I think the crisis level that we're seeing in New York City, in New Jersey, and so many parts of the East Coast is a really important moment, both because of the desperation in people's lives, the lack of critical resources and transportation needs being unmet here as we get farther away from the storm. This issue of climate change and how government responds to it, this is a critical moment for voters to be thinking about, who are frustrated by dysfunction in government that cannot meet critical needs. We face infrastructure needs. We face climate change needs that require government response on the scale of the federal government. And I think it's not just Mayor Bloomberg, but other people who are looking at this in the final days and saying, hey, this has some impact here on how I live and ultimately how I may vote.
Chuck, where are you going to be looking over the next 4 days? I know you're following the trail of the president and of Mitt Romney, and looking at the map to kind of read into where they're most concerned or where they're most focused. Where will you be zeroed in on?
Well, look, the schedule is everything. It tells you what they believe, and when you look at the president's schedule, it's pretty obvious. They believe that their whole goal is to get to 272 electoral votes. 71 or 72, depending on how the quote-unquote Midwest firewall holds up. But it really is all about Ohio and, to a lesser extent, Wisconsin. And, you know, they've got Colorado they visit twice. Why? It's the Wisconsin backup. Iowa they visit twice. Why? It's their Nevada backup, and vice versa. If one slips, they want to be able to hold up there. But I'm fascinated by also what Romney's done in adding this Pennsylvania on Sunday. Is it a sign of strength, or is it potentially a sign of weakness? Is it, oh, wait a minute, is this sort of an onside kick, hoping you recover it and you still got to throw the bomb? Because if you pick off Pennsylvania, then you don't have to worry about Ohio anymore. And how much of this Pennsylvania stop is about that versus a sign of strength? So to me, these candidate schedules say a lot. And the fact that he's spending one less event in Ohio and deciding somehow one event in Pennsylvania might make a difference, I think it says a lot about where they think Ohio is.
Lawrence, if you look at the preponderance of the public polls, they match with what the Obama campaign says. Small but durable leads. What's the best case if you're the Romney campaign, from their point of view, to say the Romney can win? what would the public polls and the Obama campaign be missing?
Just an overall, what the overall polls, the national polls show, which is a much closer race for Romney, and the old Reagan model of, hey, it came at the last minute, that there was this last minute decision heading into the polls that I'm going to make that change. And so I'm not sure there's something obviously they can't point to a track in the battleground polls today that says this, and see how that indicates we're going to win. I think they're stuck back on that argument of, look at how good we're doing, in the overall 50-state polling. We think that's going to have an effect.
Well, and there are two particular pieces to that, right? And I'm going to ask David and Chuck to explain this for me. But the interesting things are, right, that right now the national polling shows Mitt Romney ahead with independents. It's very rare for anybody to win a presidential election losing independents. Right now, President Obama is losing independents, and not by a little. And the second thing is the notion that there's a conventional wisdom about what happens with undecided voters in an incumbent election, that they tend to break overwhelmingly at this point for the challenger. So David explained to me, and Chuck then after David explained to me, how those two things can be true. How can it be true that President Obama's way behind with independents, and also be true if conventional wisdom holds that most undecided voters will break for the challenger, and yet it seems right on the basis of everything that we know that President Obama is in fact the favorite today?
Right. John, I think it's interesting. One of the things that you hear talking to the Obama campaign is where they look at these models of late-breaking undecideds. They also are looking at favorable, unfavorable ratings in some of these battleground states, and are seeing, as I think our Marist NBC polls indicated, that in a state, Chuck, and correct me if I'm wrong, in Iowa, where you have Mitt Romney still upside down in his favorable, unfavorable rating. What does that say to the Obama campaign? They're going to be able to keep pace with these late-breaking undecideds and split them, if not come out ahead. And on the other point, I think it's fundamentally a view of what's the electorate going to look like on Election Day, because you do talk to Romney folks who believe that this wave idea is real, that they see evidence of that in the national polling, a vulnerable incumbent president, which we know to be true, and despite overperformance, it seems, in the polls in a state like Ohio, that Romney can have such an impressive election day. So I think it's really a question of what does the electorate look like? Is the Obama coalition of African Americans, Hispanics, women, and younger voters as sizable as they expect it to be, that it keeps that edge all the way through Election Day?
John, the other thing is, what's the evidence that undecideds have broken in one direction in a presidential race? Basically, the only evidence everybody points to is back to 1980. You can't actually find any. I went back and looked at all of the polling before 2000, in my old days at the hotline, before 04, before 08, and the electoral projections based on all of the polling that we trusted in the good polling. We were very careful. We didn't just use any old robo-poll at the time, same with what we do here. And they were right in line, and it's a proof that the undecided vote, just like in 04, happened again in 2000, happened in 08, and it's likely to happen now, only breaks about 55-45 in favor of one candidate over the other. So there isn't this heavy break. I go back to 80, everybody says it broke in 80. We also didn't have the same amount of data in 1980 that we do today, and so that's something that, was it breaking or was it slowly moving, and would you have seen it in better shape? I think when you look back at history, Reagan's folks say, hey, they saw this building a lot longer than when it happened. The other part of this is, both could be right. Remember John Kerry, 4 days out. First of all, they were making the same argument, hey, this is going to break, and when it breaks, it's all going to break our direction. Well, Kerry hit all of his turnout targets, but so did Bush. And I have a feeling that we're in a situation where both sides are right. There's an enthusiastic Republican vote out there that's going to show up in bigger numbers, and there is this durable coalition of voters thanks to census and population growth. And so, yes, maybe there's not the same enthusiasm, but because of population growth, the African American, Hispanic numbers are going to be sort of make it that we're going to sort of two giant coalitions colliding, and it's going to lead to this very close race where the field organization is going to be the 1-point difference in about 5 states.
Chuck, in terms of both presidential candidates, what do you think their floor and ceiling is in terms of national popular vote?
Well, I think that the president is probably, I would say, just under 51 is the ceiling, and I'd say 48.5 is the floor. And I think Romney has, I'd say the floor is about the same, 48.5 to 49, but I think his ceiling's a little bit higher. I'd say his ceiling would be 52, 52.5.
And Mark, I know you're hearing the same thing. And one of the things that the Romney folks believe, to the point that Chuck was making about turnout, is that they have been able to grow since this debate the pro-Romney sentiment as opposed to just an anti-President Obama sentiment, and that's going to propel them. I talked to other Republicans who are more familiar with the Get Out the Vote operation, that they sense a great deal of enthusiasm. But again, going back to Chuck's point, remember Ohio 2004, and how many more Democrats came out that year because of a terrific turnout operation in Ohio, and it simply wasn't enough because the president, President Bush, relying on Senator Rob Portman, who wasn't senator at the time, was still turning out his base of conservatives in the southern part of the state. So I think what does the vote actually look like? What does the electorate look like? Again, is going to be critical.
And David, you'll be on the air 48 hours before Election Day on Meet the Press. Who do you have on?
We're going to talk to David Plouffe about how it all looks, but also about the storm from the federal government's point of view, with the president just there and what other resources they can provide. We'll also talk to Virginia's Eric Cantor about not just the race, but governing whoever becomes president as we move forward. And Morning Joe is going to join our roundtable as well.
All right, we'll look forward to that Sunday on Meet the Press. David Gregory, Chuck Todd. Chuck, we'll see you on the Daily Rundown coming up shortly. Thanks, guys.
You got it, buddy.
Coming up, Parade Magazine has a little advice for the next president, whoever he may be. Maggie Murphy with a preview of Parade's election issue. More Morning Joe when we come back.